All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a seriously complex web of leverage, military aid, and global oil, all based on a fascinating analysis by the Geopolitical Economic Report. We're looking at a situation here where the public rhetoric often totally masks the real geopolitical forces playing out behind the scenes.
So, to map out the reality versus the rhetoric, we're going to hit 5 key areas today. First up, the US-Iran negotiations. Then the global oil thread, the US-Israel dynamic, tracing the actual military aid, and finally, we'll look at who truly holds the leverage.
Section 1. The US-Iran negotiations. We kick off our timeline with a pretty major, albeit turbulent, diplomatic move. According to the source, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance actually traveled to Switzerland for negotiations with Iranian officials, brokered by Pakistan and Qatar.
Now, these talks, as outlined by the report, had a massive objective, ending what the source describes as a U.S. war against Iran that had already spanned over 100 days. The overarching goal? To end all regional wars. Quite the ambition, right? But the report points out a massive roadblock. According to the analysis, Iran seriously doubts the U.S.'s commitment to these peace talks. Why is that? Well, because while the deal requires an end to regional conflicts, Israel continues its military strikes in Lebanon.
Which brings us to Section 2, the global oil threat. Because when Iran perceives these deal violations, they respond by targeting the global economy. And that puts the spotlight squarely on the Strait of Hormuz. The report defines this incredibly narrow waterway as literally the world's most important oil transit choke point. In this geopolitical chess match, Iran uses the strait as major geostrategic leverage. The report highlights that Tehran has actually vowed to reclose the Strait of Hormuz if Israel doesn't stick to the agreement to halt attacks on Lebanon. To put that into perspective, a massive 20% of all globally traded oil passes right through that strait on a daily basis. 20%! If that supply is choked off, we're talking about a devastating global oil shortage. The price you pay at the gas pump, it would absolutely skyrocket. The source makes it clear that this ripple effect would be felt immediately by pretty much everyone everywhere. To really underscore the severity of this leverage, the source points back to a G7 summit press conference where Donald Trump openly admitted the catastrophic economic impact if that oil transit stops. He said, "Also, we run out of reserves in about 4 weeks, and you want to see bedlam." The report emphasizes that the U.S. government is acutely aware of how disastrous this scenario would be. And to make matters even more precarious, the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve currently sits at its lowest level in 43 years, over 4 decades. This lack of a safety net, as the analysis suggests, hands Iran an incredible amount of leverage, not just over Washington, but over the entire global economy.
Moving on to Section 3, the US-Israel dynamic. Let's dig into how this specific relationship completely complicates those peace talks over in Switzerland.
The report argues that to really grasp this relationship, we have to look past that popular narrative of Israel being the tail wagging the dog. Instead, the source brings up a really striking quote from Alexander Haig, a former U.S. Secretary of State from the Reagan era. He said, "Israel is the largest American aircraft carrier in the world that cannot be sunk." According to the explainer's source material, this quote perfectly captures the actual power dynamic. It's the U.S. that holds the real leverage.
But hold on. If the U.S. holds the power, why does it always look so contentious in the press? We see these public disputes all the time, right? Like this mic drop moment from J.D. Vance directing his criticism right at Israeli cabinet members, saying, "If I was in the cabinet of the Israeli government, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world."
However, the Geopolitical Economic Report suggests this friction, it's largely a public relations illusion. While politicians like Vance are publicly pushing back against Israeli officials, the stark policy reality behind closed doors is entirely different. The U.S. administration is simultaneously fast-tracking an $8.6 billion arms deal to Israel and, notably, bypassing congressional review to make it happen. The source emphasizes that the actions are completely contradicting the harsh public rhetoric.
So let's look at Section 4, tracing the military aid. Because to understand the true dynamic here, we literally just have to follow the money. According to official U.S. government data cited in the report, the historical military aid given to Israel sits at a staggering $175 billion, unadjusted. As the source points out, if you actually adjusted that figure for inflation, we'd be talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, if we break down the more recent $21.7 billion allocated through 2025, the aid covers the whole shebang, everything from foreign military financing to missile defense,
But the report highlights a totally critical underlying reality here. The U.S. isn't just handing over giant pallets of cash. This money is largely recycled right back into U.S. military-industrial corporations. For-profit companies like Boeing and Lockheed Martin are the ones building the weapons which are then shipped over.
And the reliance on these U.S.-built weapons, it is absolute. Take this admission from J.D. Vance himself. 2/3 of the defensive weapons that have protected your homeland have been built by American hands. The source argues this backs up a major claim, one that's even been acknowledged by top Israeli military officials, which is that Israel simply cannot wage war in Gaza or Lebanon without immense, uninterrupted U.S. support.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Who holds the leverage? Let's bring this full circle and look at exactly how this military backing translates to actions on the ground.
The report points to the severe consequences of these U.S.-funded weapons, citing findings from Amnesty International. The human rights organization stated that the Israeli military's repeated use of unlawful mass evacuation flagrantly violates international humanitarian law and amounts to a war crime. The explainer's source alleges that these weapons are actively being used to forcibly displace civilians. The stated goal, according to the report, to colonize southern Lebanon up to the Litani River, specifically noting the presence of some highly profitable offshore natural gas fields right in that area.
And the source notes that a very similar dynamic is playing out in Gaza. The public is essentially presented with this ceasefire illusion, where U.S. politicians take credit for brokering peace. But the on-the-ground reality? It reveals near-daily airstrikes and plans to fully colonize the territory. The source characterizes this whole narrative as a charade, arguing that it's an illusion permitted only by continued U.S. backing.
When you lay out the timeline, the explainer's core argument forms a crystal-clear pattern. We go from a war of aggression in February 2024 to Iran threatening the Strait of Hormuz in June, straight through to the end of the U.S. aid window in September 2025. The pattern is undeniable. Ongoing military actions and continuous weapon shipments consistently, time and time again, undermine any diplomatic progress made at the negotiating table.
Which leaves us with a truly critical final question. The Geopolitical Economy Report essentially presents a stark put-up-or-shut-up scenario for U.S. politicians. If leverage truly dictates geopolitics, do public peace talks matter at all without actual changes in military support? I mean, is a genuine peace deal even possible while the uninterrupted flow of weapons continues? It is a profound contradiction, and it definitely leaves us wondering what the true goal of all this geopolitical maneuvering really is.